What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some exciting news about Larian Studios' next game in the form of Divinity, which by all accounts seems to be a Divinity 3, but we'll get to that in a moment. The title itself is just Divinity. Now, this is extremely exciting news for me in particular, not just because I love Larian Studios, but for people who have been around for my channel for a really long time. You may just remember that there was a time I was a dedicated lore channel for the Divinity series. In fact, my sign-off, May You Wander in Wisdom, comes from Jahan. He says it to you when you exit conversation with him in Divinity Original Sin 2. To this day, if you search Divinity lore on YouTube, you will be bombarded with videos on my own channel, and I'm going to put some of that lore to use when talking about the announcement of this game, because I think there's some really interesting stuff in the trailer. But speaking of that trailer, there are really only some small parts of it that I can actually show you, because it's a very gory and graphic trailer that would get demonetized in a heartbeat. Or at the very least, age-restricted, which is its own problem. I'm going to show some still shots here and there, that kind of thing, but by and large, I'll just link the trailer down below, and then I will simply talk about what is there and try to show off what I can. Now, we got all of this news from the announcement in the form of a trailer at the Game Awards last night. However, they also plugged the website for the game, which came with a press pack, which actually included some other information in a one-pager that, while not super useful to general audiences, is obviously going to put in some work here. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. So, Divinity here, while not explicitly a sequel to Original Sin or even the rest of the Divinity franchise, the press pack thing specifically mentioned that the gods are silent. That's important because Original Sin 2 ends with the gods being dead. They don't make an appearance in Divinity 2 Ego Draconis, really, where that is actually like 60 years past Original Sin 2. And when I've talked about this previously, that was actually something I really wanted from a potential game in the Divinity franchise, which is to advance the timeline, as there's a lot of unresolved stuff there that we're about to get into. However, the focus of the trailer, it is essentially like a festival taking place where a bunch of cheery, happy people are essentially burning a man alive as part of a sort of wicker festival. As that is happening, he suddenly explodes into some sort of demonic fury, killing that guy, obviously, but then causing all sorts of mayhem, which is where the trailer itself ends. But there's a couple things to note along the way. One, probably worth a mention that that guy has a bunch of runes carved on his chest that's a 7-pointed star, which may be a nod to the supposed 7 gods, which leads me to believe that it's a possibility, I don't know this for sure, obviously, that the person they're burning isn't necessarily human, and that's why everyone's celebrating it. Demons, in fact, have been known to take human form. We see that just in Original Sin 2, even with Adramalik, and in other games as well, though less known. Overall, like Original Sin 1 has a demon masquerading as a guy. Very common, and given the reaction when he dies, I'm inclined to believe, given the rest of the trailer and the Hellstone at the end of it, that that person doesn't seem to be human. However, I just mentioned the Hellstone. There was, leading up to the Game Awards, this big statue discovered out in the desert via, it's like teasers and stuff, and then it was later matched up with some trademarks about Divinity, which I didn't want to cover because I was getting a little too excited about it, but that statue is what they are referring to as the Hellstone, which we see at the end of the trailer. Why is that specifically interesting? Well, it's interesting because in Divinity lore, Rivellon, as the world is known, doesn't actually have a place called Hell. There are planes of existence where like demons come from, and the 8th god Chaos was sort of banished to, if you will, by the other 7. Neither of those planes they are associated with are known specifically as Hell, though. So, I mean, it may well just be that this is a simplification for the sake of putting it out there. I just wanted to point out that, technically speaking, demons in Divinity were made by the 8th god Chaos. His compatriots' reaction to him making demons was to fight him with their collective might and seal him away in a realm known as Tartarus. The games have never explored Tartarus, but it is where the demons are actually from. They stage all of their invasions into Rivellon from another plane of existence known as Nemesis. Nemesis was a peaceful place home to a different race called the Renari, which only featured in Beyond Divinity, and didn't come up much since. However, I mentioned that that might just be a nothing burger, and the reason for that is simply that they didn't really start caring a ton about having a cohesive world and lore together until like Original Sin 1 and 2. Meaning that I think it's pretty safe to expect them to probably even retcon some of that stuff further, if they even consider it canon at this point. Either way, though, that human who is being burned, sort of like dripping into toxic power that then throws up corrupted beings of some sort certainly seems demonic in nature to me. However, it is also possible that it might have something to do with the Voidwoken and the God King, which I can't go into great detail about without just straight up spoiling Original Sin 2, but suffice to say, the God King is the leader of the Voidwoken. He was never, destroyed as part of Original Sin 2, and it's very possible he has more machinations up his sleeve, and given that his form has some resemblances to what the Hellstone is meant to be, I don't think that's impossible. I mean, to be honest, maybe he even teamed up with the 8th God Chaos, which hasn't been seen in a while either, all of which are interesting possibilities. Another interesting thing I noticed about the trailer is that it seems to feature an orc, a guy who's drinking heavily, has some tusks on his bottom teeth, that kind of thing. That's interesting because orcs typically have been depicted very differently throughout the Divinity franchise, and generally speaking, they have not been playable or really involved all that much. They were in Original Sin 1, I would say, more than the others. Most recently, mind you, they make appearances here and there, but typically as enemies, that kind of thing. So just the fact that they've got one carousing with regular people during this festival as part of the trailer is actually more noteworthy than it might initially appear. Either way, though, truth be told, it's an announcement trailer. This game is likely quite some time away, and while I'm sure Larian knows more or less what they are doing next as they move forward, obviously we can only really speculate here. Just the fact that they're calling it the Hellstone is interesting. The fact that they are saying that the game is going to be informed by Original Sin 1 and 2, and the fact that they mention that the gods are silent specifically, leads me to believe that this will probably be the farthest out game in the timeline, which is what I'm hoping for. I wouldn't say it's impossible for them to have it somewhere else in the timeline. I've actually got an old video, mind you, about the series timeline, which is all over the place. They could certainly have put it somewhere else, but just from the information given, it does kind of sound like this will be farther out than Divinity 2 Ego Draconis. And if so, Damien will likely play a role. He doesn't come up too much in Original Sin 2, but he is the avatar of Chaos and a big feature of a lot of the early games. He's also kind of MIA as far as the latest timeline goes. He leaves Ego Draconis, unscathed. His plans don't go exactly according to plan, but he lives. So of the potential antagonists for the series that are available to pull for this game, you've basically got Damien, Chaos, and the God King, who could, I think, make an appearance on top of just, bringing in completely new stuff to the lore. Lots of exciting possibilities, and I am absolutely pumped to cover them. However, what we do not know, and what I wouldn't be able to hazard a guess on, actually, is what genre of video game will this be? That's going to be an interesting one. So, people probably know Larian best from Baldur's Gate 3, which is a turn-based RPG. Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 were turn-based, and while, yes, you could use their biggest hits as a means to be the next one will probably be a big CRPG again. However, I would be remiss not to mention that of the currently 6 games in the Divinity franchise, only 2 of those were turn-based CRPGs. The original game, Divine Divinity, and its sequel, Beyond Divinity, were more ARPGs in the vein of something like Diablo. Divinity 2 Ego Draconis was a third-person action game, and then Divinity Dragon Commander was a real-time strategy game. So the genres for Divinity are all over the place. But if I was a betting man, I would say probably either some sort of third-person action thing. They haven't done anything like that in a while, and I could see them going back to the roots of that original game for Ego Draconis to bring the timeline forward and, of course, do something fresh themselves. Or I could see them continuing down the turn-based since they've had just an insane amount of success with that. I would say those are the 2 most likely, but realistically, it could go either way. Who knows? Now, what this means for me personally and this channel. So I plan to, over the course of probably the next couple of months, give or take, go back through all of my lore videos. I have an extensive collection of lore videos for all of the Divinity games. So here's the thing. I don't necessarily know that I need to remake most of those. I stopped making them because I was kind of out of ideas and all the info was up to date. But what I will likely do is go back through them, kind of get in mind what the sort of points of all that lore that I could either sharpen up focus on, redo to give people a more, up-to-date perspective, that kind of thing. The problem with that, though, even just trying to do that with the limited capacity of this announcement is a little tough. So without having more information about when the game takes place, what it's actually going to be about, it's hard to necessarily update any of those videos with new information versus just remaking them to make them a little easier to watch, as they were very early in my YouTube career. Either way, though, I will be kind of keeping an eye out there for, what I can update, that kind of stuff. So obviously, I will be covering this more in the future. I am extraordinarily pumped for this. I have joked for years about how all of my reviews and everything were me just killing time until there was more Divinity lore to cover. So suffice to say, this game has shot up to my single most anticipated title, period. I'm going to be covering it a lot. And to that end, I certainly hope you're along for the ride. Let me know how you feel about it down in the comments section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.